Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, you name it, all around the world of crypto and blockchain. And I have another amazing guest. Most of my guests, almost all of my guests actually, are amazing. And this is no exception. Today, I have the CEO of HEALE Labs. His name is Todd Haselhorst. Todd, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Great to be on the show.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. So let's kick things off, and let me ask you first. What is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question. So I built my first company when I was 12, mowing my neighbors' lawns and did landscaping and stuff like that for them. So I've always had that entrepreneurial bent. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, third generation. When I got into high school, I got really good at athletics, ended up getting a full ride scholarship, went to the University of Kansas, where I learned the value of teamwork and how to, the difference between a losing team and a winning team. And during my time at Kansas, I uh, got a degree in economics and game theory and graduated in 2008 when the markets crashed. And so, my choices were pretty slim at that point because, people with 15 years of experience and MBAs from Harvard and Yale were competing for the same job. So I put my entrepreneurial hat back on and went into start a freight brokerage with a friend. Ended up starting a moving brokerage shortly after that and getting into the technology side where I learned product development and how to build software tools and things that ultimately streamline the shipping process. But the problem that we always had when building these different platforms is that we had all of this data all over the place and we had all these integrations that we had to do. We had to manage these different data sources, set up different web services, be able to ingest the data and really just use it internally for us. So with my background in logistics, I spent 15 years in the space, built and sold two different companies, including my background in economics and game theory. When Web3 came along, when blockchain came along, when tokenization came along, and tokenomics came along in particular, that was very appealing to me. So I've spent the last 12 years in the Web3 space, really just studying, what is Web3, what's this technology, what's happening, and waited ultimately. Had the idea in 2016, ended up waiting until the technology was mature enough, scalable enough. Now we have L2s, we have account abstraction, we have zero knowledge proofs, we can run a private network on a public chain. And so here we are.
Very cool. So you played football for the University of Kansas.
Yeah. Actually, was on the best team in school history. When I got there, we were 2-10, and when I left, we were 12-1, winning the Orange Bowl.
I remember that. Very cool.
Yeah.
I coached my son's little league football through sixth grade, and then he decided he wanted to do something else. So he's doing rowing now, but maybe someday he'll play for the Kansas basketball team. We'll see.
That'd be great, right?
Yeah, yeah. So in addition to the software and the economics and the game theory, you have a really interesting and unique hero's journey, right? For yourself and your life. What is that all about? And what is your hero's journey?
Yeah, so everybody has a story, and mine has been rife with various different obstacles and challenges to overcome. So um, when I when I got to Kansas, I was at the peak of my career as a freshman. I played. I was they were talking about NFL and scouts were talking to me, all that. And so everything was just moving in this direction in this culmination of all the things that I wanted to do as a child, which was to be an athlete, to be a hero for my community. And so my sophomore year, I ended up getting injured. I tore both posterior labrums in my shoulders. I had, spinal and nerve damage because football is a very tough and brutal sport. Every hit, as a D lineman in particular, is like a 35-mile-an-hour car wreck. And so my sophomore year was really the first time that I had experienced significant adversity, in my athletic career. And at that point, that was my identity. So got the surgery, spent 6 months, for the first time since I was 6 years old, not playing football, which was a unique and very interesting experience. And during that time, that was a point in time when they, I don't know if you remember the whole Oxycontin thing where they were prescribing Oxycontin for, a loose hangnail. And so I got caught up in that. I ended up 6 months on painkillers. And from that point, it really just completely altered my life and my career in particular in football, because now I had this thing that could numb my physical pain, it could numb my emotional pain, it could numb, the feelings of not fitting in and all those types of things that I had deep inside of me, my whole life at that point. So battled drug addiction. And then when I was in when I got done with school, I ended up, the addiction kept going. I found other ways of feeding that addiction. And the summer of 2010, I was diagnosed with cancer. So the night before the surgery, I ended up taking Oxycontin, going in the morning of the surgery, and having an adverse reaction with the anesthesia. And so thankfully my dad was there to look through my text and say, oh, he took, whatever this Oxycontin thing is the night before the surgery. So that was my brush with death. That was my wake up call. That was my, the one of the pivotal moments in the, in the turning of my that part of the hero's journey where you face great adversity and then you have this moment that will forever change you. And so it was quite an experience. So I ended up in rehab after I had cancer in June. I was in rehab in July. Once I got out, just really focused on rebuilding my life. And at that point, I hadn't been able to address the underlying, identity crisis that I was facing, because my whole life I was going to be an athlete. I was going to be a football player. I was going to go to the NFL. That was my dream. And so fast forward a couple of years, I end up living in Phoenix. I end up having a tumor growing on my throat. And so I had my second bout. And cancer is a very interesting thing because it really forces you to put your life in perspective. Unless you've faced your own mortality, it's hard to have the proper perspective for life, that every day is ultimately a gift. It's a blessing. You're even fortunate to be here. And so at that time, I met a gentleman who really helped facilitate my hero's journey, was there for me throughout that process, helped me ultimately heal from from the diseases and things that I was faced with, and spent the last 8 years really just as the culmination of all of that work, all that experience I had, coming back now on the other side, which is the redemption story in the hero's journey that everybody loves. It's when the hero stands up and takes what they learn and brings it back to the community. And so that's what I'm doing now.
I love it. We have a few things in common.
Yeah.
So yeah. the cancer, although mine is not metastatic.
Mm.
Um, and I have a friend named Bill uh, for over a couple decades. So, um, you know, I'm glad you're on the other side. And part of that, and I'm looking at how you're doing as opposed to like I'm working in my company, but not on my company. And
Hmm.
that, but you are building because one of the things that you've learned in your life, and I still have yet to learn, is that teamwork trumps talent. You know, why do you believe that's true?
Yeah, well, so I would take a team that's less talented that works together as a works together well as a team over a team of individuals that are very talented. Primarily because culture solves problems. And when you have a team that is focused on solving a problem and ultimately the mission at large, that's more important than an individual who's focused on themselves and what they can get out of it, and with them, what's in it for me. So in order to accomplish a mission or anything great, you have to surround yourself with the right team, the right people, and you have to all align around a vision and a mission, and then work together to make that happen. If you're not working together to make that happen, then one person's wandering in this direction, another one's wandering in that direction, this person's going over here, and you've probably heard the saying, it's like herding cats. um, that is a symptom of a lack of teamwork. And so it's that was what I learned ultimately from athletics. I saw the difference, when I was in high school. As a sophomore, we went from 5-7. When I was a senior, we were 12-1. College, 2-10. Senior, 12-1. And so I got to really see the difference between starting at point A and then moving to point B and focusing on a mission, a vision, a goal. And when you have that, everybody's working harder, everybody's playing their part, everybody's doing their role. You have trust, you have overall belief, and the motivation is there for people to put in that extra work, because this is hard work. It takes a lot to do anything, to accomplish any vision or any mission. It takes a lot of work. And so for me, it's most important that you have the right team. They obviously also have to have the right skills. They have to have right talent. But even then, somebody who doesn't have the skill but is the right team member, they'll go out and acquire those skills. And a lot of times they'll learn to do it better than somebody who is just purely talented.
Yeah. So I'm excited about what you are building at Heal Labs, right? Because you're taking those lessons and you're building this organization, right? What is Heal
Mhm.
Labs about, and what do you guys do well together?
Yeah, so Healy Labs is ultimately solving a pretty big problem in the logistics industry, which is the data problem. And what we're focused on is building a network, that a depend data infrastructure that ultimately seamlessly connects systems together in the logistics industry, then standardizes the data between them, tokenizes that data and the underlying assets, and then incentivizing best practices during the shipment, with the overall goal of increasing profits for shippers, brokers, freight forwarders, carriers, drivers, while ultimately by reducing fraud, waste, theft, and errors. And so within that data problem, you ultimately have all these poorly connected systems that people who are coordinating the shipments are ultimately relying on to make decisions. And a lot of times the information in those systems, it's inaccurate, it's incomplete, it's out of date. And that ultimately opens up the opportunity for billions of dollars of fraud, waste, theft, and errors from the equation. And since the blockchain came out, the narrative in the logistics industry was that this is the future of logistics. It was a narrative that ultimately everybody saw this as a perfect fit to use blockchain in logistics. And there were various, problems with initial iterations, primarily on the permissionless side. It was the technology wasn't scalable. It was too expensive. It was too slow. The tooling and infrastructure wasn't available. You couldn't run a private network on a public chain. And then on the permission side, there was really a lack of trust. Ultimately, you had, IBM, Maersk, FedEx were all working in this consortium. It was a closed network. It was centralized, owned by the companies that were building it. It was anti-competitive. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the competitors didn't want to join. They didn't want to share their data. And it was very expensive to implement. So it was enterprise, top-down focused. And there was really no clear ROI, not only for TradeLens and Maersk FedEx's project, but it also had a lack of clear ROI for the end users that were using it. So the cost of implementing it was too high to justify the limited benefits that they're going to get from security, transparency, and traceability. So what we did is we waited. So we saw all of that happen. We saw the permissionless attempts, we saw the permissioned attempts, and we waited until the technology was scalable enough on the permissionless side to run zero knowledge proofs, to use account abstraction, to have layer 2 rollups, so that the cost is low, the finality times are faster, and then all the tooling available to be able to actually run not only enterprises, but also small to medium-sized businesses. So that's why we built HEALE as an open, decentralized, neutral network that has no upfront costs, and adoption is streamlined and simplified for the everybody from the small fleet carrier that owns 1 to 5 trucks all the way up to the largest enterprises in the space. In addition to that, we changed the economics so that there's not only is there a substantially lower cost for each of the different parties involved in that shipment, but also adding additional benefits of tokenization, rewards, data ownership, creating this new operating model, this new economic model that ultimately is a high ROI for them.
I like it. So you watched the Hyperledger come and go. You watched Accenture create an editable blockchain, which makes no sense, come and go.
Yeah.
That was smart. I tried to build something in 2017 against and that didn't work out. So you watched everything.
Yeah. It took a lot of patience, to sit there and actually, the idea for HEALE actually came to me just through a flash of insight. One day I was shaving my head, and I was I think I was like mid-stroke, and all of a sudden I had this flash of insight, and immediately this whole idea came to me. Like every piece of it and everything that I'm doing now is just putting one foot in front of the other. It's a culmination of steps that I've taken. And so not only is the hero's journey an internal one, for the individual, but at that point, my whole life made sense. When I was in college, I didn't know why I studied economics and game theory. I didn't know why I was in the logistics industry, and for whatever reason could never get out of it. I didn't know why I was learning product development and software development. I didn't know why any of these things were actually happening until I had the flash of insight. And then, all of a sudden my whole life made sense and was put into context.
I can relate. When I was in college, they had you take that career assessment tests, like, and then
Hmm.
I'm like, I was interested in many things, and every time I came back with insurance, and I was like, I have no interest in insurance. And and my career unfolded, and I worked 12 years at AIG. So I was like, well, how that happen?
Yeah.
You
How'd
know,
that happen?
yeah. So I'm I don't know. I'm looking at the logistics industry, like at a high level, right? I
Yeah.
don't understand all the intricacies and everything, but I'm just looking at I've had a few interviews with logistics, and
Mhm.
um at a high level, what are the major like issues? You said fraud, you said waste. What are the major issues there, and how are you tackling them?
Yeah, so the major issues ultimately, if you look at them one by one, so within fraud, about 5% of a transaction is lost due to fraud. Fraud also causes settlement times to be delayed, but ultimately $140 billion in daily disputes. And the average settlement time currently for those shipments and those invoices is 45 days. The reason that exists is because there's no there's no ledger, there's no blockchain that can prove I picked up this shipment at this date and time. I did what I said I was going to do. Um, and therefore you should pay me what we agreed to at the beginning. And so a lot of times what happens is, different things get stuffed into the invoice where, oh, now all of a sudden I'm adding this different fuel charge than what this fuel surcharge than what we agreed to, or I'm adding this fee or I'm adding that fee, or I'm removing this fee, removing that fee. But when that's in a smart contract, there's no dispute on what we agreed to because it's in code. It's literally on chain. And so when you look at it from that perspective, just the invoice reconciliation and payments piece, streamlining that process is going to reduce a lot of the, fraudulent invoices that ultimately increase the settlement times and hold up these payments in dispute. So that's one piece of fraud. You also have fraud that's used to facilitate theft. One of the big things happening in the logistics industry right now is you have this process where thieves are going out and they're buying different MC numbers. They're ultimately creating these fraudulent companies and then using those companies to intercept shipments and steal, a truckload of TVs or gold or whatever it is. And so they're pulling off these heists. And there's in the last year alone, there was a 430% increase in this type of theft where they were stealing the carrier's identity or they were stealing the broker's identity and they were going in and stealing shipments ultimately, which in the United States is $35 billion problem annually. So those two things are very big, you know, from a risk perspective, those are big issues, right? But then you have more benign things like errors, where you have multiple systems. Those multiple systems have different data, and somebody over here accidentally pressed the wrong key, or this software wasn't using address validation, and so now we have two different addresses, same location but two different addresses. So then when a driver goes out, oh, I was sent to the wrong location, I need to turn around, I need to go drive this new location, or I there was an error on the shipment. It was 6 pallets, not five, or it was 1,200 pounds, not 1,500 pounds, or even the other way around. And so that also creates a lot of the invoices. It creates a lot of the dispute, the invoice disputes and billing issues, billing errors. But you also have all those coordination errors that are happening along the way. And again, the primary reason this problem exists is because you have all these different systems that are used by all these different parties, and you may have multiple carriers working with the same shipment to go from point A to point B to point C to point D to point E. And so that coordination is very expensive. It's very inefficient. And ultimately, 20% of the costs associated with the coordination of that shipment, the back office costs, are ultimately spent on trying to find the right information. So through email, through text, through phone call, how do I find the right information so I can properly coordinate that shipment? And so that's ultimately, the life of a freight broker and a freight forwarder, which play a pivotal role in this industry. Their job is going back and forth between the shipper and the carrier, collecting information from both so that they can properly coordinate that shipment. So those are just a few of the many challenges that the industry faced, and ultimately that leads to issues around sustainability. You have 92 billion annually that's wasted because drivers are driving 40 billion empty miles. Driving around with an empty truck doesn't make anyone money. Sitting on a dock longer than you weren't planning doesn't make anybody money. And so these are all different inefficiencies that exist in the industry. And the primary reason that inefficiency exists is because of this network, poorly connected systems, bad data. And so what HEALE is focused on is, again, connecting those systems, standardizing the data between them so that we can match addresses and say, hey, this is the right location, or this is the right shipment, or this data has been validated. But also tokenizing that to create a master record so that all the parties that are involved in that transaction can update that master record with accurate, relevant, up-to-date information. So everybody's coordinating the shipment around the same information. And that is, fraud, waste, theft, errors, eliminating all those on a scale that is at this point, it's hard to actually quantify what that is, but we put our best guess, and we said that 268 billion is lost due to fraud, waste, theft, and errors globally. There's also been some estimates of 600 billion, but it's really hard to know because the problem is so prevalent.
That to me, it sounds like you're on the right track of standardizing everything and creating master data records and everything like that. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of similar to what I did building databases at AIG, but they were assets not to solve global problems. But in order to do it properly, though, we had to set up data governance and standards and best practices, right? So what are some of the best practices you're implementing that will help, make this a reality and drive the economy forward?
Yeah, so great question. So what we're doing is we're creating a data standard that no matter the data source, it gets normalized into before we inject it into the network. So we're not telling them, hey, you have to change your internal data, your data model, your internal data standards. We're saying, here's a unified format that our network will accept, and then mapping their internal data to that standard, to that universal or unified standard before injecting it into the network. So that's where the mapping, the normalization, all of that comes in to be able to say, in this system, they refer to it as primary address. But in this normalized data model, we call it address one. So now I'm mapping primary address to address one. So that's one component of it. But in order to make this functional, and in order to make this as easy as possible, we had to actually take the complexity out of the hands of the user. So what we did is we created a wallet that is specific to our network. It's specific to the logistics industry, that that makes it easy for these people to interact with the network through the API. And the way that it works is that a user, let's say it's a driver, let's say it's a dispatcher, a company, whoever it is, could be the owner of a company, admin in a company. They download a wallet, they create, they connect their wallet to their different applications through our app store, and then they're on the network and start pushing and pulling data from the network and ultimately receiving rewards back from the network, interacting and interfacing with the network. And so we had to focus on the user experience. We had to take the complexity, we had to abstract away all the complexity so that the end user, it's very easy user experience for them to use, so that we can ultimately solve for the lowest common denominator and make it scalable enough for anybody to use.
Makes sense to me. Sounds good. So, I want to go back to your teamwork, mission.
Yeah.
Your goal is to unite the entire logistics space, which is a great and commendable goal. And I can see you working on that and doing it. There are other areas of blockchain where things are not united. Things are very
Yeah.
fragmented. Social media projects all over the world. What lessons are you getting, from your view and standpoint on unification that you think that other sectors can take and learn from you?
Yeah, great question. So we're in the deep end space, but we're in a segment that we call Titan, token incentivized data infrastructure networks. So what is Titan? Titan is a concept around leveraging token incentives to create an economic model on top of data infrastructure so that an industry can leverage the same data source, can create that master record for whatever it is. So, one that comes to mind, but there's a lot of complexity around this, and I'm not an expert in medical records and stuff like that. But there's really no reason why the medical industry shouldn't have at the core that same data infrastructure, and then leveraging tokens to create and incentivize healthy behaviors, right? So if you look at it through the lens of every industry should be using the same source of data, everybody should be updating those master records within that particular industry, within that particular segment. And all of the behaviors that are beneficial to that industry that create efficiency within that industry, those behaviors should be rewarded, whether it's a B2B market or whether it's a B2C market. And so the way we're looking at Titan or token incentivized data infrastructure networks is that ultimately you're creating this shared backend for an industry to use, and then you're leveraging behavioral economics on the supply side and the demand side to reward behaviors that ultimately make that data infrastructure more valuable across the entire industry by making it more efficient, increasing productivity, which ultimately increases the GDP and makes all the companies involved more profitable.
And makes them work ethically.
Yeah. Yep.
So the
Because
important.
if you look at it, if you made more money doing the right thing than doing the wrong thing, we wouldn't have 98% or 99% of the problems that we have in the world. The problems in the world come down to misalignment of incentives and the ability for people to make more money by doing the wrong thing than they make by doing the right thing. And so that is just inherent in human behavior, is that when you have a network, when you have a decision to make, typically people are going to want to make the decision that is more economically viable or socially viable? Does it increase their wealth? Does it increase their status in life? For the most part, those are the motivating factors behind decisions, and that's one of the things around mechanism design and stuff like that. So when you can create systems that incentivize specific behaviors that use the carrot, not the stick, to get people to play a better game, which ultimately is better for everyone, then we're harnessing and leveraging human potential. We're harnessing and leveraging, the human nature, the human condition. We're leveraging that to create a better world.
I'm on board with you. I agree with that. That sounds good to me.
One at a time.
One
That's
time.
it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you very much for
Yeah,
speaking.
thank you.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
How can people become part of your ecosystem? How can they become a client to Healing Labs? How can you help them? How can they reach out? How can they get to know more information about you?
Yeah, so you can go to healelabs.com. On there, join our social channels. We're active in Telegram, we're active on Twitter, Discord. That's how you can become part of the conversation, engage with our community, and just at. We also have our token generation event, our network launch that's coming up in Q3 of 2024. So take part, be a part of the community, be a contributor, help us make blockchain great again.
I love it. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks. Great to be here.